My name is Dr. Paul Hickey. I'm the CFO of StealthEnomics, and I'll be your tour guide today as we continue with episode 3 on our CIO Higher Ed Roundtable Series. So with that, we're going to talk about ransomware today. Now, if you watch the previous episodes, and by the way, if you haven't, we certainly hope that you will, please look at our YouTube channel. Go ahead and take a look at the old episodes, and hopefully you'll continue to join us for the new episodes. But today, unlike campus safety last time, I don't necessarily have any direct experience with ransomware, thank goodness. But the one thing I think of is, well, two things. One, the financial impact, of course, but also it's about losing files. Now, our two experts are going to give us a much deeper understanding of that. But when I think of losing files, it takes me back to the first time that my files were not available. 7th grade lab class, my partner and I, we went ahead and hit that F key on Atari Writer. We heard that, got scared, didn't say anything, and the next day our disk was blank. Our teacher looked at us and said, "Did you hit format?" Which of course we said, no. But that was my first experience in losing access to my files. And even as a 7th grader, I understand the panic that it could create. But with that, let's go ahead and bring in our resident expert, John Norris. John, how you doing today?
Hey, good afternoon, Paul. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining us. John Norris is the CIO of Johnson C. Smith University in Charlotte. He has over 20 years of information technology and information systems experience. And basically his day, and we learned last time, students number one, dealing with students, faculty, administration, staff, and managing all of the IT needs of that diverse community. So, John, as I like to start off with, how was your week and how did ransomware impact it?
Well, I do have a wood desk sitting in front of me, so I'm going to knock on the desk there.
I got to reach off camera and knock on my wood.
Absolutely, because, absolutely. That was not a direct event that happened this week or in recent days and whatever, which is a good thing, and we're not saying that we did anything that make us impenetrable. We don't want to put that out there. As most people talk about the ransomware attacks and data breaches, it's not a matter of if, but when. The number of institutions that have reported breaches and ransomware attacks continues to increase, and we see that only increasing as the months and weeks go on for the rest of this year. I was really under the impression that the heyday was 2021. There were numerous attacks on higher institutions of higher education, but it looks like 2023 is following in that same suit. I've seen a number of attacks on universities of all kinds. Just recently, I have a colleague of mine who's a good friend.
So you're seeing on small, large, private, public? I mean, it's not discriminating against anybody?
It's not discriminating. At one point, we were under the impression it was the larger research institutions because they have a lot of intellectual proprietary data and human research data that they're dealing with. But honestly, it's across the board. I have a colleague, good friend of mine, and they had a ransomware attack here back in February. Yikes. And the reason it hit so home to me is because I know him so well. I know almost every system they have on their campus, and we have almost the exact same systems. I mean, we literally go to the same conferences, sit down and talk to some of the same vendors and share information back and forth. And they had a major data breach which led to a ransomware attack. They're in Virginia, so I couldn't reach out and try to assist them in any way. But in talking about it, I realized, we're all in a vulnerable state. And what we can do is try to prepare, have a plan of how we're going to mitigate it. But essentially, you're at the mercy of the bad actors in a lot of instances because it's constantly evolving there.
So I hope that some of the information that was shared was not how to get into your systems, of course, with the ransomware folks. But after that attack, I mean, it sounds like very similar setup as yours. What did you change? How did you react? And how are you preparing for that?
Yeah, we went back and tried to harden as many things as we could. We went back and we added a second vendor to help us monitor any threats to our network. We had what we thought was a good system, but we just wanted to double check and make sure, because we're not in a position to recover very well from ransomware attacks. And also, it looks like increasingly the insurance companies that we use, they have a lot more regulations than previous years. They want to make sure that you've done step A through Z before they will even insure you from cyber attacks. And that's a big thing for small institutions who can't always afford to do each of those steps in one fell swoop, in 1 year, one calendar year, one fiscal year. We always have plans to do all those steps, but sometimes it takes a little time to get the right amount of funding there and whatnot. So, yeah, we did. We also made sure that all of our systems were patched and updated regularly, and someone was monitoring that so that we wouldn't get caught with our pants down on something that seemed like a pretty minor system.
So wait, is that all those patches that come up on my computer that I'm not supposed to hit ignore? I'm supposed to go ahead and initiate them and load them up?
Now imagine that times 100, because you also got to patch all the servers and switches and routers on the back end. So all those things have to be patched. And if you don't patch, you're vulnerable. And if we read the fine print, it really tells us that. But a lot of times those things are a headache. But as IT department, as an area responsible, that's part of our job zero, is to make sure the systems are updated and patched and the current security assessment is there and the current security benefits are in place.
I want to talk about that insurance, but I'm going to hold that for later when we have Rob on with us. But I do want to ask about the insurance and get both of your thoughts on that, because honestly, I wouldn't even think of insurance with ransomware. I would think that's hardened IT system. So I like that. All right, so keep that in the back of your head. Wanted to change gears a little bit. So you touched on, like 2 years ago, I think you said 2020 was the big year for ransomware attacks. What do you see as the emerging risks in the next 2 to 3 years? And, what's your plan going forward to combat it and protect yourself?
Yeah, well, I think all I can do is prepare and plan for what threats that are out there today. This is a billion-dollar industry, the threats, the attacks, and they're going to continually each year add more ways of trying to attack institutions. One of the prevailing thoughts is after the pandemic and during the pandemic, there's so much turnover at places like colleges and universities and every other sector that, some of the old school guys who were brought up on security first, and we're going to protect this data, we're going to protect everything, they kind of phased out and went on to do other things or just retired. And when you look around the landscape now, you'll see a lot of younger folks in CIO roles or in CISO roles or even in IT in general at these universities. And I think some of the threat actors think that's where the vulnerability is that we're not exactly paying attention to everything. And the fact that we're doing a lot of remote hybrid work also opens up some holes that we may not even be familiar with today. Because we assume we know what all of our end users are doing. We assume we know that they're following all the rules and protocols and only logging on at secure sites and locations and not leaving those things open and using VPN every single time. But there's no way of really monitoring that to make 100% sure that the end users who are no longer here are really following all the protocols. And so those are the kind of things we got to keep in mind. Number one thing, we got to keep educating. We got to keep educating. That's what our business is. We're in the business of educating. So that part should be easy for us. But I'll tell you it's not. It's not. A lot of people assume that everything is covered because nothing has happened to us or to them and whatnot and whatnot. And that's what it happens when you drop your guard there. As far as, you got to be prepared, and it starts with each individual who has access to this campus and our network and the data that's afforded.
All right. Well, I do not envy you trying to monitor all those folks, especially as they're all over the place, not necessarily on campus. But John, would you mind sticking around? We want to grab you with the Q&A, but I would like to bring in John. I'm sorry, John. John, will you stick around?
I'll be here.
Thank you. All right, let me introduce Rob. Sorry about that. Hey, Rob, how you doing?
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. All right. So Rob is with Blue Mantis. And basically, if you need a company that's looking at cybersecurity, hybrid, or a modern workplace IT infrastructure or cloud migration, Blue Mantis has decades of experience adapting to the new technologies and being your guide. And with that, we'd like to introduce the field CISO, Rob Fitzgerald. Rob has the last 20 years in cybersecurity and compliance, with almost 15 years as a testifying expert on cybercrime. Previously at PwC in Manadant, he advised many of the world's largest organizations on cybersecurity strategy and execution, and also an entrepreneur himself. With that, Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm psyched to be here. I love talking about universities and security and helping people figure out or find a way to protect themselves. So thank you, Paul.
Fantastic. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob for 10 minutes. And viewers at home, I have been warned that Rob is very verbose, so I have a hook at the 10-minute mark to come back in, and then we will continue the show. But Rob, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining. As Paul had mentioned, we're almost a 35-year-old company. We have been doing a ton of work in initially basic IT space, but what's happened, and John will talk about this as well later, I'm sure, is technology evolves, and all of a sudden we need to start implementing security and then implementing compliance and other things like that to ensure that the business runs or continues to operate in a successful fashion. And it's really great to be here because universities and college campuses are so unique to the operating world that oftentimes they either get overlooked, or from my experience, they're not well understood. And one of the big things that happens in a educational environment, right, is you have a very diverse population. You have students and professors and unions and staff and ad hoc staff or adjunct staff, and you have research that's going on, and each one of these have a different value perspective on data. And so one of the great things to do is to really think about these different populations and others to get the business, to understand the business agility that you need to be able to optimize employee productivity, so that you can increase your value, do more with less, and enhance your data security. So how do we get to enhanced security? Well, the way that we do it at Blue Mantis when we're working with clients is really to look at this matrix, right? And across this matrix, you have strategy, architecture, integration, and management. And then we also have vision, visibility, verification, and validation. And the key thing that I always ask our clients to think about, and you should too with your clients, is where do we want to go, right? Like, where do we want to go? And we all have clients. So whether you're talking to the research department or the works department or the bursar's office, where do we want to go? And what does that ultimately want to look like? Because once you start with the end in mind, you can slide backwards to figure out what you need to build and what you need to ensure efficiency and security as you're building this up. And so now we've designed something, and you're able to talk to your team and say, okay, what tools do we need? When you're doing the architecture, you don't need to solve the tool problem. Let's solve the design. What's it going to look like? And then what tools are we going to use to build this? And ultimately, and this is the part that often gets overlooked, is how are we going to manage this in an ongoing manner that makes sense to us and our organizations? And some organizations, some universities will bring in student staff or grad staff to be able to help out. Others will outsource it. Others will hire full-time. A lot of times it's a combination of all three, just based on resources that would be available. But let's take a look at what this looks like in the real world. One of the things that we find a lot of universities are struggling with is disparate technology, legacy and disparate technology, as well as a mix-in of cutting-edge technology that may or may not be fully known to the CIO and CISO of the institution. But we always like to say, let's start with the most basic thing. Are you able to implement encrypted endpoints? Can we lock down these machines? And then from there, how do we control a user from moving from one machine to the next machine, east-west traffic? And how do we stop users from just downloading and installing anything they want? And again, with the diverse population of users that universities and college campuses have, this can be a struggle. You may have to set up different sets of rules and policies and procedures based on the population, the user population, but it can be done. So if we can get to a point where you have encrypted endpoints, it's difficult, if not impossible, to move east-west, and it's difficult, if not impossible, to install software, specifically malicious code, on an endpoint in an environment. We have essentially blocked out hackers and malware users, and unless it's a specifically targeted case, from interrupting or disturbing the institutional's IT operations. And from there, as you get more and more mature, looking at role-based access, well, who specifically should have access to these servers or these applications, and how do we control that, right? Network access controls and even network segmentation. Should the poli-sci department be able to access the maths department or the chem law department or whatever? And then ultimately, and I joke about this a lot with newcomers to the industry that come to me and ask for advice on how do I get into cybersecurity. In my opinion, learning how to secure Active Directory is the number one key to building a secure environment. In fact, I joke and say, if you're coming into the industry and you can focus on how to harden Active Directory, you will be wildly successful, probably paid way more money than anyone else, because it's such a obscure, it's not difficult, but complex thing to be able to master. Once you master it, you're worth your weight in gold. So let's take a look at this in the real world, because a lot of times we throw out these concepts and ideas, and I want to get really specific. When I'm thinking about organizations, I'm always asking myself, where are we on the path to maturity? Do we have antivirus in place? Do we have a firewall in place? Is there a spam filter in place? Have we implemented MFA? And by the way, the catch is, how have we implemented MFA? We have worked on a number over the past 3 years, and John's right, ransomware is skyrocketing right now. It is skyrocketing right now, and it's only getting worse. And one of the things that the hackers and the ransomware gangs have figured out is that most organizations that say they have MFA, multi-factor authentication, or dual-factor authentication in place, what they actually have is they have locked down their G Suite or their O365, their Microsoft Office email, but they have not implemented MFA across the machines, across the networks, applications that reside in the environment. And what ends up happening is, oh, we don't have to worry, we have MFA. And what they have is MFA for email. But if the hackers can get in another way, say by exploiting a vulnerability, a technical vulnerability, then they don't need MFA. They can just sit on a computer, wait for someone to log in, and ride that MFA session to be able to go do whatever it is that they want to do. As you get more mature, we look at, PAM, privilege access management, controlling and monitoring where specific users, in particular privileged users, the ones that have the keys to the kingdom, are able to move. We're able to look at WAF technology, right? So with firewalls, they protect inside the environment. With a WAF,
Hey, Rob.
yes. Oh, we almost done? Oh, no. All
Sorry,
right.
but you get to stick around.
All right.
We bring
Sorry about
John
that.
back in. All right, come on, you got to put me on the bottom. I'm holding these two experts up. I am the pedestal upon which they stand. So, John, where do you want to go after listening to what Rob said?
Well, I think one of the bigger things to recognize from Rob's conversation is that this is a difficult task. This is heavy lifting, and trying to do that by yourself or with just the limited knowledge of your current IT department is almost impossible. The velocity that things are changing and threats are happening, and there's remedies for those threats is really awesome to see, but you can't keep up with all of it. So you need someone to help who's focused on just that part. Even if you hired your own CISO, he's still limited in how much time and how much knowledge he can gain or she can gain in a period of time. Having partners to help with this is really the key to it. You need to come up with a strategy. Okay, and then once you have that strategy, of course, educating the powers that be, okay, this is our strategy, but then getting down to
Wait a
execution.
minute, John, you're saying that you have to educate the bosses?
Oh, absolutely. And it's a difficult task because a lot of times we just don't see it until we feel it, till it hurts and whatnot. I do know that a lot of presidents subscribe to different publications and they do hear about this stuff, but they really don't feel it until it's real at their campuses or nearby and whatnot. And so, yeah, we got to continue to educate, and that's not always easy. Some of these presidents come from lots of different backgrounds, and IT or cybersecurity is nowhere in their background and whatnot. So you got to spend quite a amount of time doing that, and that's a good thing because it just sharpens your skills and your ability to make sure your strategy makes sense. And then you got to convince the finance folks that, okay, we got to spend money and we may not get this money back, but we got to spend money to make sure we're prepared, we're hardened the best we can. And I still can't guarantee it, but we got to spend the money.
All right. Well, hey, careful on the finance because we wouldn't want to mess up with the money people. We control the budget, so we have a lot to say. But actually, I want to go back, Rob. Something that John said near the top of the program. He talked about insurance. Can you talk about the insurance side? Because again, when I think of it, I'm thinking it's just like hardened technology. And then if you guys can kick that one around.
So absolutely, I can talk about the insurance side. John's right. It is incredibly difficult, especially for institutions right now, to get to obtain the cyber insurance they need. So first off, cyber insurance is no longer just sign up and here you go. It is a huge questionnaire interrogative process that you need to go through, and it can take upwards of 6 months for an institution to get cyber insurance. Not only that, they've broken it out. There's now specific ransomware insurance. There's data loss insurance. There's data theft insurance. There's cyber crime insurance, all of which are different components. And if you don't have the right combination and you become a victim, there will be no insurance dollars for you. On top of that, as John knows, the insurers are pushing on victims to prove that they need the money for the recovery and that they have actually complied with the application process and are doing what they said they could do in the process. John, am I wrong?
Absolutely correct. And that questionnaire is very long, and it's almost as if they're attempting to trip you up so that they can cover themselves when something does happen. It feels that way. Maybe not, but it does feel that way over the past couple of years for sure.
Yeah.
5 years ago, cyber insurance was pretty easy to get, but increasingly, what you have to go through to get it is getting pretty tough out here.
Yeah, it's difficult. And then so when you do become a victim, the first thing that we recommend our clients to do is, one, engage outside counsel, and two, use that outside counsel to contact the insurance broker and carrier to review what policies could apply, and the carrier to notify them that you're going to have a claim. And so what ends up happening is you want to set up some protections. Again, the outside counsel provides attorney-client privilege, so you have some protection there. But then separately, you want to be able to see what resources the insurance carrier can provide, as well as what they are going to demand in return for providing those resources.
All right. Well, we're getting close to the end, and I have to make sure that I keep half an eye on the clock as the commissioner of the time police. Rob, 30 seconds, last thoughts. What do you want folks, our viewers, to walk away with? The one thing that you want them to remember.
If I were to help anyone right now, and John nailed it early on when he was speaking, get your backups in place. Get immutable backups in place, because immutable backups mean they are protected. Even if you're hit with ransomware or a cyber attack, you have access to data that you can restore. Find those critical systems in your environment and get those backed up separately, secondly, from your traditional typical backup. And from there, build an emergency response plan, an incident response plan that you can work so that when you do have a problem, you have already gone through the motions and know who you need to call, how to reach out to them, and who needs to do what, who's assigned to what roles. That will help you recover faster.
Great. I gave you more than 30 seconds. John,
Sorry.
What's the one? That's okay. Again, Commissioner of the Time Police.
Yeah.
John, what's your one
incident response plan, and practice it. It needs to be like a tabletop exercise, because when it happens, I'm sure there's a lot of panic involved. But if you know who's responsible, what the steps are, it feels like this would be a lot easier to get to some place. You still might not like where you get, but at least you're going to get to some place where you can start to work from here. So that incident response plan is very important.
Fantastic. Thank you. That I suspect a lot of teams, they might have a plan, they put it on a shelf, it checks a box that they have it, but they don't necessarily practice it. All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. John Norris, our resident CIO expert, and Rob Fitzgerald, the CISO of Blue Mantis, our vendor expert this week. Again, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Our coming attractions, again, this is a series, and we welcome your ideas, thoughts, and topics. CIOs, what's keeping you up at night? But the last 3 sessions have kind of scared me a little. We've talked about cybercrime, we've talked about campus safety, and now ransomware. We're going to turn it a little bit, and we're going to talk about reaching for the cloud, basically cloud migration. And then the next one after that is this enhancing the student experience. So I want to have some variety. Again, if you have any ideas, please let us know. Whoops, sorry, I keep doing it the wrong way. Like our channel, share our channel. Please, look for us on socials. And if you are interested in a free cybersecurity threat assessment, we'd be happy to go ahead and help you out. Thank you very much. And on behalf of StealthEnomics, I'm Dr. Paul Hickey. I wish you the best of days. Be safe out there.